Hey guys, back for chapter 4. If you want to reach out, talk about the book, or talk about anything really, if you need help with math, feel free to shoot me an email at jteng@bcps.org or on Twitter at Mr. Tang's World, all one word. And I'll be more than happy to help and talk to you about whatever it is that you want to talk about. All right, chapter 4. Miles had been to this place before, knew it the way he knew his own home, but this was far from home. Pillars the size of trees in fantasy forest, white stone, marble, big wooden door with brass ring in the middle, a castle entrance, fountain in front of the steps, off-white linen curtains at the windows, pulled back and tied off. Inside, leather couches like giant thrones, oak tables, tile floors far nicer than the crummy ones in Brooklyn bathrooms, portraits on the wall of old white men, dark paintings that made this whole house look sepia. A crystal chandelier, a grandfather clock, a cattle iron, and a cat o' nine tails as decoration. The smell familiar, the fight even more so. Left, duck, left hook, duck, clean, right uppercut to Miles' chin. He bit down on his tongue. Penny flavored blood filled his mouth, and before he could recover, there was a foot in his chest knocking him back, his body banging against the massive front door. Then came the rush, a flurry of fists. Miles did his best to block as many as he could before grabbing a lamp off the side table next to him. The lampshade made of red, green, and purple stained glass, and cracking it over the head of who? It was as if this person he was fighting was blurred, as if there was some sort of invisible, heavy plastic between them, distorting the figure. The glass on the lamp shattered, an explosion of shards as brightly colored as Sunday sprinkles. The person Miles was fighting hit the floor, and Miles shot some web to trap him there. But the blur dodged it, rolling backward up onto his feet, white silken cord flying from his wrist as well. What? How? Miles bobbed, then charged up. Web slinging? Blur, spearing him back into the old cabinet full of crystal trinkets. Blood dripped down his distorted face and onto the mosaic tile floor. Miles punched him. The blur punched back, and the two traded blows until finally Miles released more webbing, anticipating his combatant's next move. As expected, the blurred fighter dodged it, the web attaching itself to the old wooden cabinet. All part of the plan. Miles wound the web around his wrist and grabbed it, yanking the burrow down. A cacophony of clinking as the crystal trinkets tipped. The blurry battler quickly turned around to stop it from falling on him. And that's when Miles used a shooter on his other hand to web up the fighter's beclouded legs. Distract and defeat. It's over, Miles said, watching the man struggle to get free. Miles unloaded what seemed like a never-ending stream of webbing until his adversary was trapped in what looked like a white sleeping bag. The blur didn't respond, just rolled his head around as Miles bent over him, pushing his hands into his foggy face, and instantly, as if Miles' hands were pushing clouds from the sun, the man's face came into focus. Uncle Aaron? Miles, Aaron whimpered. Before Miles could say anything else, Aaron's cheeks sank and his nose narrowed into a blade of skin and cartilage. The patch of hair on his chin grew long and white. There were burn marks on his face and began to wrinkle and crack like dry clay. Miles jumped back, not sure what his uncle was doing there, who he was turning into, what he was turning into. Miles, Aaron whispered, then a little louder. Miles. Miles shook his head, looked away, squeezed his eyes shut, then opened them and turned back toward Uncle Aaron, whose mouth, slightly opened, now housed rotten teeth. Miles, he called out again. His voice thickened. Miles' name's like slime in his throat. Miles leaned in. Uncle Aaron flashed a sly smile, yanked his now knobby white hands from the web, and wrapped his fingers around Miles' throat, squeezing it as hard as he could. Miles! The loss of breath, The kind of the kind that comes from falling. Miles crashed hard onto his twin bed. Miles! Gank yelled. He was standing in front of Miles' bed in sweatpants and a t-shirt with "I like to move it" printed across the front in neon green. Huh? What? What's... Miles put his hand over his face. What time is it? Almost 7. Ugh. He spread his fingers and peeked through them like a fence picket. Did I do it again? Yeah, man, Gang said. I got up to go to the bathroom and you were literally crawling on the ceiling. And I just gotta tell you, as your friend, it's not cool to wake up to a human-sized spider above your head. Sorry, man. Just crazy dream. Your uncle again? Gank asked, sitting back on his bed. Yeah, Miles huffed. It wasn't a hard guess for Gank. Miles had been dreaming about his uncle for a long time, since he watched him die. The day at the Brooke houses, Uncle Aaron knew that the spider that bit Miles wasn't just a normal spider, and Miles knew it too. After watching his uncle step on it and noticing the blood smear radiated on a hardwood, Miles was certain that, even though his uncle didn't intentionally plant the spider, it was obviously special, which meant the bite was special, which meant there was a good chance that Miles would also now be special, no longer a regular boy. This will be a simple conversation, a short one, Uncle Aaron said the next time they met up and they sat on the couch. No pizza this time. Aaron looked Miles square in the face. I'll tell people. Tell people what? Miles asked, perplexed. About you. About what you can do. What you are. Aaron pointed to the small circular scar on the top of Miles' hand, no bigger than a pimple, then sat back and smiled. He wasn't stupid, he explained to Miles. He was willing to leak Miles' secret. Unless. Unless what? Unless Miles agreed to help him take down a mob boss and a former friend of Aaron's everyone called the Scorpion. Miles didn't have a choice. He did what he had to do, and used the fact that Scorpion was a terrible criminal to justify it. But the threat of ratting Miles out didn't go away. Instead, Uncle Aaron demanded that Miles continue to work for him, with him, mostly for him. But Miles knew that wasn't an option. When he confronted Aaron, a brutal battle ensued. Aaron got the best of Miles, who was just still a novice at using his powers, leaving nothing but the final blow of one of Aaron's electric gloves, called gauntlets. But the gauntlet malfunctioned and blew up in Aaron's face, leaving him crushed by an explosion he planned to use, in a desperate fit to kill Miles. You're just like me, Aaron said, burned and bloody, before losing consciousness. It was the last thing he said to Miles. When you fight your uncle to the death, it's hard not to shake it, hard not to see his face, his eyes glossing over, his breath slowing, gurgling, stopping. It's hard to keep it a secret that seems to seep into everything. Your immediate family, your school, your sleep. Gank knew, because Gank knew everything. But that didn't stop the constant loop playing over and over again in Miles' head. He could never go back to bed after the nightmares. He tried time and time again, but it was impossible. Plus, his alarm was going to go off in a few minutes anyway. So, with a disgruntled sigh, Miles got up. Gank was in a shower already, and as Miles ventured down the hall, of feet funk, sliding lazily in his flip-flops into the bathroom, he could hear Gank speaking softly to himself in one of the shower stalls. As opposed to the stench of toxic toes in the hallways, the bathroom smelled more like a wet dog, and corn chips. Steam wafted through the air. Who you talking to, Gank? Miles groused, turning the knob on the sink faucet, then catching himself and added, You know what? Don't tell me. I don't want to know. Whatever, man. I'm working on my poetry. All 3 lines have to be between 14 and 16 syllables, Gank explained through a vinyl shower curtain. So you gotta count 'em out. Miles cupped his hand under his spigot and splashed water on his face. Why? He asked. What do you mean, why? Gank snatched one side of the curtain back, just enough to push his face through. Because my people said so. Then he snatched the curtain closed again and yelled, "Joe!" Miles and Gang flip-flopped back to their room, got dressed, hair brushing, sneaker brushing, split a pack of cold Pop-Tarts, and headed out to class. But before they left the dorm, Miles doubled back, just for a moment. He walked over to the closet, opened the door, Gank still in the hallway waiting for him. He peered into the pile of clothes and shoes. There, in the dark corner, was the red and black skin he usually carried around with him every day, now balled up underneath a mess of BVA sweatshirts, unmatched socks, and spotless sneakers. He stared at it for a few seconds before reaching through the junk and yanking out the mask. He held it up, limp like a melted face. Then, shaking his head, stuffed it back down into the pile of leather and lace. Not today. At Brooklyn Visions Academy, students had only 4 classes a semester. Those classes were 90 minutes long. So if you had bad classes, they were extra bad. But at least Miles got to start the day with math. Calculus was one of Miles' favorite classes. It was taught by Mr. Borum, a skeletal man with olive skin and a nose like an ice pick. Calculus, Mr. Borum had said on his first day of class, jacking his pants up to his navel while pacing across the room, is the mathematical study of change. But after that speech came the real glory of math, at least to Miles. Numbers and symbols and letters. A sweet sight of 1 plus 1 equals alphabet, a challenge that Miles was always excited about facing. After that, chemistry with Mrs. Khalil. Then, while half the students had first lunch, Miles and Gang headed to Miss Blaufus's class. The thing about Miss Blaufus was that she didn't really look like she was supposed to be teaching at PVA. Where was the blazer, the overstarched button-up, the khakis, the sensible shoes? She did have the glasses, though, but they weren't the Brooklyn Visions Academy glasses, the wire circles or the plastic rectangles. No, Miss Blaufus wore cat eye frames, bright yellow, as if they were made of lemon rinds. Her hair, a choppy short cut, was always tousled. Sometimes she wore dresses, but usually she wore jeans rolled up at the ankles, loose blouses, long sweaters scrunched to her elbows, high heels Monday through Thursday, and sneakers on Friday. She had a tattoo on her wrist of a semicolon and one on her forearm of a slice of pepperoni pizza. "Mr. Morales, welcome back," she said, as Miles and Gank entered the classroom. Her room was covered in posters of writers, most of whom Miles had never heard of before. He took his seat. Gank sat behind him. Winnie Stockton, a Scolo, which was what the kids on scholarship called themselves, from Washington Heights, sat in front of him. "Hi, Miss Blaufus," Miles said, a slight twinge of embarrassment in his voice. He knew everyone knew that he had been suspended, and more importantly, he knew why everyone thought they knew why. The kid who had the piece so bad he was willing to be punished for it. When really, he was the kid who was Spider-Man. Well, as of the night before, the kid formerly known as Spider-Man. "Yo, Miss Blaufus," Gang followed up excitedly. "I've been working on my CJOs." "Yeah, he has." Miles shook his head, but stopped shaking it when Alicia Carson sat down at the desk beside him. Alicia. A beautiful lump in his throat. All brains, brown skin, and braids. A slightly crooked smile and just enough of a lisp to be charming. She smelled like vanilla, but Miles knew there was also a touch of sandalwood, probably a spritz of some kind of perfume just behind her ear. His mother loved sandalwood, burned sandalwood incense to kill the smell of fried fish in the house all the time. "Hey, Miles," Alicia said. "Hey, Alicia." In the corner of his eye, Miles saw Gank bouncing his eyebrows like a creep. Miles talked to Gank about Alicia all the time, and being the best friend he was, Gank was always trying to convince Miles that she liked him back, and that he should make a move. But Miles wouldn't. He couldn't. He wanted to, but all the cool he thought he had was currently balled up into a spandex mess in his closet. "Okay, everyone, settle down." Miss Blaufus stood in front of the class, with her fingers tucked into her jean pockets. "I hope everyone had a good weekend. I hope you all took a moment to breathe in the poetry all around you." The poetry all around you. Normally, statements like that made Miles cringe, but Miss Blaufus could get away with it. We're going to be working on Sijos all week, using the first 10 minutes of class to write. It doesn't have to be perfect or even finished, but I want you to build your syllabic muscles. Miss Blaffus curled her arm as if flexing her bicep. Now, does anybody want to throw out a prompt we should use? Chrissy Bentley, who was sitting on the other side of the room, flung her hand up. Chrissy? Dogs. Dogs? Ryan Ratcliffe scowled. Yeah, what's wrong with dogs? Yank leaned forward and whispered into Miles' ear. Dude, I can't write a C-Joe about a cockapoo. Not gonna do it. Miles held in his laughter. Okay, so Ryan, what do you think is a better prompt? Miss Blaffus said. I mean, Ryan wiped one hand over the other as if he was washing them. Love. The class groaned. Seriously? Ryan Ratcliffe was the kind of dude who never left his dorm without splashing his neck in old man cologne that smelled like black pepper. Plus, he had the I look like I might be on TV thing down. Blue eyes, face like it had been chiseled out of stone, teeth like they'd been made specially from elephant tusk. Dude was so TV, so gross. Love, huh? Miss Blaffer said. Okay, well, how about we do love, but we keep it open. That way, Chrissy, you can talk about how much you love your dog. Ryan, you can talk about how much you love yourself. Chrissy dropped in. The class rumbled with muted laughter. Ryan was too cold to even be fazed. Or whatever you want. Miss Blaffus pinched back a chuckle. Everyone can use the love prompt any way they desire, okay? 10 minutes, starting now. The class instantly quieted. Miss Blaffus darted over to Miles and squatted beside his desk. Has Gank explained any of this to you? She whispered. He, sorta. I tried, Gank said, too loud. Shh, from someone in the class. He tried, Miles confirmed. Okay, it's real simple. 3 lines. Each one has to be between 14 and 16 syllables, and they all have jobs. The first line sets up the situation. The second develops it, and the third is a twist. Miss Blaffus spun the top off of an invisible bottle. Got it? Seemed easy enough, but once Miles started thinking about what he wanted to write about, especially as it pertained to love, he got stuck. Of course, there was his mother. She was the easiest person to write about. But he didn't know what to say about her. I love you is only 3 syllables. I love you, Ma, 4. I love you so much, Ma, 6. Or he could write about his father. Miles had been thinking about him a lot since he got back to PVA the night before. Thinking about the talk on the stoop about how Uncle Aaron had been suspended a lot. About how the most heroic thing you could do is take care of your own community. About how sometimes, to love someone, you have to be hard on them. Miles started scribbling. My father's love looks like. Miles counted out the syllables on his fingers. Started again. To my father, love sometimes means. And time's up, Miss Buffus announced. Ugh. He was just finding his groove. Does anyone want to share? Miss Blaffus asked. Lots of hands went up, and Miles didn't have to turn around to know that Gank was waving his around like a madman. How about you, Alicia? Miss Blaffus smiling. Motioned for her, smiling. Miles could hear Gank deflated behind him, his frustrated breath crawling up the back of Miles' neck. Come up to the front of the class. Alicia took her place in front of everyone, her paper in her hand, the purple ink bleeding through the back. What's the name of your Sijo? It's untitled, Alicia said. She pursed her lips for a second, then began. A romantic mountaintop view of the world is love for most. Being that close to clouds strips them of form, turns them to fog. Perhaps the real beauty is on the way up, where like is. The class erupted for a grinning Alicia as she returned to her seat. That was amazing. Miles leaned in over and said to her. She was well known around BVA as a poet and even headed the school's poetry club, the Dream Defenders, which of course Miss Blaffus was the advisor of. Miles figured she was good. He never thought of anything negative about her, ever. But he never but he had never actually been to any of the poetry club's events, mainly because he didn't think he'd get it. Only one person could say stuff like, the poetry all around you, and that person was not a teenager. Unless, of course, Alicia said it. She could have said anything. She could have written about her love for freaking cockapoos, and Miles would have found some redeeming quality in it. Thanks, she said, blushing slightly. Fantastic, Alicia, Miss Blaffis said. I should mention, Alicia and the Dream Defenders will be hosting an open mic this evening at 6 in the quad. I'd love to see you all there sharing some of this work, okay? And to sweeten the pot, if you show up, there's extra credit in it for you. Poetry is about community. It's not just about expression, but also being a witness to that expression. Miss Blaffis glanced at Miles. He could definitely use the extra credit. Again, nice job, Alicia. Yo, you think maybe Alicia's half Korean? Yank whispered in Miles' ear. Miles didn't respond, just swatted Yank's words away like a swarm of annoying gnats. In the midst of the cafeteria cacophony of pitchy voices, Miles choked down what he could of his lunch and took 2 small sips of apple juice before the bell rang. Kids jumped up from the lunch tables and poured into the hall. Gank, who had already had Chamberlain's class that morning, slapped Miles' hand before they went their separate ways. Good luck, Gank said. Yeah, thanks. Cue the ominous organ music. As Miles entered the classroom, Mr. Chamberlain was scribbling a quote passionately across the board, his handwriting scratchy and jagged. When he finished writing, Mr. Chamberlain turned to face his students, still filling in their desks. His skin was yellowy and thin, and his lips, beneath his fiery slug of a mustache, were chapped from constant licking. He assumed his normal meditative stance, hands together, fingers woven, his face a tight fist. War means fighting, and fighting means killing, he said softly. Miles refused to look him in the face. Actually, he refused to look anyone in the face. Still embarrassed about how the suspension went down. Alicia, who also had this class with Miles, sat right in front of him. Right in front of him. War means fighting, and fighting means killing, Mr. Chamberlain repeated, the students settling into silence. He was referring to the quote he'd scrawled on the board behind him. War, he started again, now closing his eyes. There was a hush in the room. For a few, it was because they were amused. For others, like Miles, it was out of respect, or maybe fear. Most students used Mr. Chamberlain's class as nap time. So for most, it was from boredom. So they used Mr. Chamberlain's class as nap time, dozing off while he droned from the front of the room with closed eyes, almost as if he was speaking in some kind of intense dream state. War means fighting, and fighting means killing. He repeated for the last time. Every day he delivered a new quote 3 times like a chant, an incantation summoning the spirit of this sucks, and this sucked. Mr. Chamberlain picked right up where Gank had said he had left off, explaining to the class that what America would be like if slavery hadn't existed. It could be argued that the country as we know it, wouldn't be here. The luxuries you all love so much, like your precious cell phones, might still be just a lofty thought meant for an alien planet somewhere far away. Slavery was a building block of our great country. We shouldn't just blindly write off the argument for the Confederacy wanting to keep it. It could very well be argued that they weren't just fighting for the present, but also for the future. While Mr. Chamberlain was yapping, Miles squirmed in his seat, not because he had to go to the bathroom. No, he knew what Mr. Chamberlain was stating so boldly was dead wrong. Morally. There were so many things to consider. The most obvious was slavery. Humans being enslaved, mistreated, killed. Then again, maybe Chamberlain was calling everyone's bluff. All the board students who he had to know weren't paying attention. Maybe he was trying to make them angry, so they would engage. Like Brad Canby, a trust fund goon with pockmarked face who was always more concerned with getting a laugh than getting an A. He never paid attention in any class, but especially not in Mr. Chamberlain. But judging from Alicia's head shaking in front of him, Miles knew she was just as disturbed by what the teacher was saying. Oh, hey, Manny. Oh, there's my cat's butt. Hey, Manny, say hi to the camera. I'm surprised this is her first appearance. Hey, baby. Where was I? And that was enough to make him put his hand up. But before he could call out for Mr. Chamberlain, who could see never, who could never see raised hands because his eyes were always so closed, Miles lowered his hand. Then he brought it up to his temple. His head was buzzing. Oh no, not again. Miles still sat still at it in his desk, trying to block Mr. Chamberlain out and let it pass. The buzzing will go away. No big deal. It's nothing anyway. But Mr. Chamberlain was really digging in now. And though given so much credit after the war for freeing slaves, it mustn't be ignored that at the beginning of this presidency, Abraham Lincoln's policies shifted dramatically from the anti-slavery platform he'd campaigned on. Buzz, buzz. Mr. Chamberlain's voice distorted in Miles' ears. Don't get up. It'll pass. It's nothing. It's probably nothing. He stared at the back of Alicia's neck, the fuzzy hair left unbraided at her nape, curling toward him. What if? No. But seriously, what if someone's hurt? What if the city's being torn apart? He kept trying to ignore it, but with every pulsing vibration came a nagging possibility that someone was in danger. Miles Morales was having a full-on meltdown. Miles thought about the people he saw in his neighborhood tweaking on the block, trying to fight off whatever they might have been addicted to. The old men crashing into the bodega door, the sheiks just trying to get to the fridge, the ladies scratching their heads and forearms, trying to remember how to get home, trying to remember when they left the house in the first place. The Cyrus shines. They going through it, Miles' father would say to explain the withdrawal, the sickness. Hang in there, he'd say to them as he and Miles walked by. Miles needed to hang in there, to resist the urge to save someone other than himself. But he was getting lightheaded. His heart was beating faster than it ever had. And it felt like his veins had tightened, making it possible to actually feel the blood coursing through his body. To try to steady his mind, he fell into a routine, a pattern, to get through the class. Buzz, 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 buzz. Breathe. Blink the blur away. Breathe. Sandalwood. Calm. Buzz, 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 buzz. Block out the droning wah, wah, wah of Mr. Chamberlain's voice. Yes, the 13th Amendment states that there shall be no more slavery in the United States, except as a punishment for crime. Perhaps it could be argued that the enslavement of our criminals is still keeping our great country alive. That statement was like a needle stuck in Miles' spine, tightening his body, forcing him to glance up. He caught Chamberlain's eye, which, surprisingly, were open just for a moment, leering directly at him. Then Chamberlain closed his eyes, steeled his face, and finished his statement. That is, in the minds of our Confederate forefathers. Buzz. Breathe. Blink the blur away. Breathe. Was he smiling? Sandalwood. Calm. Alicia, sensing Miles staring at the back of her neck like a weirdo, turned to the side, caught him out of the corner of her eye, smirked, her cheek dimpling deep enough for Miles to want to dive in. Sandalwood. Calm. Breathe. Breathe. And then, finally, the bell rang. Chair legs scraped against linoleum as people jumped up from their desks. Miles slowly stood, a ring of sweat around his t-shirt collar, relieved. He'd made it. You think he's serious, or is he baiting us? Alicia spoke softly to Miles as she packed her books away in her bag. I don't know, Miles said, whipping his forehead, then zipping his bag. Mr. Chamberlain was erasing the quote he'd written at the beginning of his class. Miles scowled at his bag. Why are you looking like that? Alicia uttered, studying Miles' face. Miles caught himself and turned his grimace to a grin, but Alicia seemed doubly confused. Now, now why are you looking like that? Did you enjoy that mess? What, the class? Miles looked down for a moment to gather himself. Of course not. No, no. His head still buzzing, his stomach still churning, sweat still leaking from his skin. He probably looked like he had pneumonia. Don't pass out, he thought. Don't pass out. And while coaching himself out of passing out, he also knew he couldn't pass up this opportunity to say something nice about Alicia. A compliment. But not about the way she looked or smelled, or the slight she substituted for every s. He needed to say something that would offset the creepy look on his face. Then it hit him. He'd tell her how much he'd like her poem about the mountain of love and like, hey, so this is kind of random, but I enjoyed your poem. He started, but then the words got trapped under a rock, rolling up under his throat. He swallowed it back down and tried again, no longer smiling. A burp escaped. Alicia cocked her head to the side. Sorry. Miles covered his mouth to block belch breath. I was saying I. His words caught again. I was saying I enjoyed your. Suddenly, it was more than just hiccups or burps. He was heaving. Alicia took a step back, stared at him, a look of concern on her face. Miles? Sorry, I. He put a hand over his mouth, lurched forward. Oh, God, I. And then he bolted away from Alicia, past Mr. Chamberlain, almost bowling over the lingering students standing in the doorway, to get to the bathroom. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I'll be back probably tomorrow with 5 and 6. Um, Hope you're enjoying this. And again, feel free to contact me. Let me know if you are um, have any questions or anything really. Okay, drop me a line. Bye, guys.